Tonight's special guest it's really an honor to have her. She's been a member with our organization for a long time. She's been an active participant out in the San Fernando Valley, ran for office out here for state legislature. And I hope that she will do that again at some point in time. I think her expertise are well needed by our community, and that's for sure. Um, she's an opinion columnist, an editorial writer as well. I have difficulties in figuring out what the difference is between an op-ed person and a columnist, and she's put me straight on that. Is a she is a columnist with them, as well as an editorial writer for the Southern California News Group. Um, there's about 11 daily papers that you write for. Susan, looking at your bio here, I was surprised that the Los Angeles Daily News, the Orange County Register, the Riverside Press Enterprise, the Long Beach Press Telegram. I'm shocked. There's a lot of writing that's going on, and it's good to have your word getting out there, and I think that's just excellent. You also served as Vice President of Communications for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association. Some of you who've been around for a while will remember that Howard Jarvis was the person who really started Prop 13. That was back really in the 70s, 70s, maybe early 80s, 70s, as I recall, late 70s, and did a great job on getting that in to protect the homeowners on making sure that their property taxes would not end up going through the roof. And that's kind of where we are now. And by the way, Shelley served for many years as the president of Valley Vote. I was one of the members of the board of that and one of the original petitioners for Valley Secession, as they called it. We like to have thought of it as Valley Cityhood, if you will, but they wanted to tag us with another moniker on that, and we're fairly successful with that. But nonetheless, she was our president for that for a number of years and served us well in that capacity as well. Well, tonight she's going to serve us in a more important capacity, I think, and that's educating us on what's going on with the legislature, particularly what's going on with this propositions, both to affect the transfer tax on property when it's going back and forth between people who passed away or between family members, and also what's going on with Prop 13, how they're attacking that, what it's going to cost us with that, what do we need to do, why are they doing this to us? You will know that the state legislature is trying to do everything it can to destroy single family residents with all the legislative stuff that's going on up there. And now they're trying to be able to, if they can't get away that way, they're just going to tax us out of existence. So, Miss Shelley, may I present you to the entire group? This is Miss Susan Shelley. It is now yours, and you are now pinned.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a Woodland Hills homeowner myself and a member of the club, and happy to be speaking to you tonight about what I'm beginning to think of as the Prop 13 Chainsaw Massacre. The legislature and the courts have been coming at Prop 13, and next year we are facing the most serious threat to Prop 13 since it was adopted in 1978. As you remember, or as you know, Prop 13 limits how much your assessed value can go up every year. It's capped at 2%. So for as long as you own your property, you are not going to be taxed on the market value of your property as they are in other states. You're going to be taxed on your assessed value, which will go up no more than 2% a year. And this creates tremendous stability, not just for the homeowners, but for the businesses, and not just for the homeowners and the businesses, but for the counties and the cities, because property tax revenue goes up even in a recession, given that it moves steadily up slowly all the time. So it's been good for budgeting. It's been good for everybody. It's an unusual formulation. I don't think there's anything like it in any of the other states, but it is working very well in California. So of course they want to destroy it. One of the things that was in Prop 13, because Howard Jarvis knew that if you cut the property tax rate and you capped the assessed value and that money printing stopped for the Treasury in Sacramento, the legislature and the cities would want to find another way to tax the same people and get the same money, calling it something else. So in addition to the familiar parts of Prop 13, there is a requirement in there that local taxes must go on the ballot for voter approval. And according to Prop 13, as written, it's a 2/3 voter approval for all local taxes. The courts hacked at that just a few years later, and they split the taxes into special taxes and general taxes. And they made up a new standard. They said, well, if it goes into the general fund, it only needs a simple majority. And a special tax we're going to define as something where you tell the voters what you're going to spend it on, and they're committing to that, and it's limited to that purpose, that's a special tax that's going to need 2/3. That came from the courts, not from Prop 13. This has been a 45-year battle over whether it will or will not be easier to raise your taxes. And the latest thing that has happened is in 2017, the state Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case called California Cannabis Coalition versus City of Upland, generally known as the Upland case. The Upland case holding was that maybe if a tax increase is put on the ballot by a citizen's initiative, then it doesn't need a 2/3 vote at all. Maybe the Constitution doesn't even apply if a tax increase is from the citizens' initiative. Well, who are the citizens who are standing in front of a supermarket trying to raise their own taxes? They're not the citizens in the sense of being regular voters. They're special interest groups who are going to get the money. So the Upland precedent has created a situation where special interest groups, different unions or contractors or anybody who wants the money, can write their own tax increase, put it on an initiative petition, which directs the money to themselves, collect the signatures to get it on the local ballot, and pass it with a simple majority instead of 2/3. Now, one of the taxes that did this was Measure ULA in Los Angeles, which is a real estate transfer tax. They called it a mansion tax for homeless services and tenant protection and affordable housing. But actually, it's not a mansion tax. It's a tax on all property over $5 million sale price, not profit, sale price. So that's commercial property, that's apartment buildings, that's everything. It's not just mansions, it's not just $5 million single family homes, it's every kind of property in Los Angeles at that price point. So that was one of the taxes that was considered an upland tax. It only needed supposedly a simple majority, even though under the Constitution it would need 2/3 as a special tax. It got less than 2/3. It was declared passed. It's being challenged because, among other things, besides the 2/3, real estate transfer taxes are prohibited flat out by Prop 13. But there again, the courts have said, well, maybe not. Maybe if it's a general tax from a charter city, maybe the Constitution doesn't apply and you can have a transfer tax. So that's where we are, back and forth, back and forth. What's being done about it? A new initiative called the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act closes all these loopholes, not just those, but others. It forces more transparency and more accountability. It straightens out some of this stuff about fees that are really taxes and strengthens the protections for taxpayers there. And the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act has qualified already for the November 2024 ballot. More than 1 million California voters signed petitions to put it on the ballot. But the legislature and the city governments don't like it. And so what the legislature did is they passed a legislative constitutional amendment, ACA 13, which will apply only to the Taxpayer Protection Act as it's written, narrowly defined to apply just to that. And instead of a simple majority vote to pass that constitutional amendment, it would require 2/3, which is much harder to get on a statewide initiative. So if ACA 13, we don't have a proposition number yet, but if that winds up if that passes on the November ballot and the Taxpayer Protection Act passes, it's going into the courts. It's going to be a complete mystery what's going to come out at the other end. But it was the legislature trying to stop the Taxpayer Protection Act from passing. Just to be clear, constitutional amendments in California since 1849, since the handwritten Constitution that you can find on the Secretary of State's website, since 1849, all constitutional amendments have passed with a simple majority of the electorate approving them. This would be the only one in history that required anything more than that to pass. It only applies to initiatives that protect taxpayers. And so that was a dirty trick. And even that was not enough. The legislature and the governor filed a lawsuit directly in the state Supreme Court, an original writ directly in the Supreme Court, demanding that the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act be pulled off the ballot. For reasons that they said, which are not terribly credible, they said it's not an amendment, it's a revision. And as a revision, it can't be done with an initiative. And then they said it's going to impair the functions of government by making it too hard to raise taxes. And then they said it would be a gut punch to the administrative state. This is all in the lawsuit. And, you know, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which is one of the backers of this measure, the Taxpayer Protection Act, is just looking at this and saying, what are they doing? And who knows what the courts will do, because the courts have been so unfriendly to taxpayers and kind of off the notes in terms of interpreting the Constitution however they feel like it without being really true to the letter of the law. So we all wait to find out what happens there. That's your next November's ballot, the Taxpayer Protection Act and this ACA 13 that's trying to kill it, if the Taxpayer Protection Act survives to the ballot and isn't yanked by the courts. The latest battle in whether it will or will not be easier to raise your taxes. And just to be clear, local governments can raise your taxes with a simple majority vote anytime they want to put that on the ballot. They just have to put it in the general fund. And then they have to be responsible for how they allocate the funds. But they don't want to do that because the voters don't trust them. And the voters won't pass general taxes as easily as they will if something's put in front of them that says this is for 911 service. Well, why didn't they spend the other money on 911 service? Because they wanted to come to you for the tax increase. So that's the game they've been playing. And that's the game that the Taxpayer Protection Act really shuts down. So we will see what happens with that. Also on your November ballot will be ACA 1, Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1. Now, this is a direct chainsaw to Prop 13. That takes the 2/3 vote requirement and doesn't bother with little exceptions about citizens' initiatives. It just cuts the rate down to 55%. So tax increases would pass with 55% of the vote instead of 2/3. It's a direct amendment of Prop 13. And it applies to infrastructure and affordable housing, which covers an awful lot of ground. Infrastructure is everything, and affordable housing is everything that's left. So it not only applies to bonds. Prop 39, if you remember, in 2000, made school bonds passed with just 55%, but just school bonds, not school parcel taxes. Those still need 2/3.
Shelley, if I can interrupt, I want to read to from the legislative. This is a legislative digest from that. If you want to, you go and pull this and take a look at it. Hard to read through the actual proposed law itself, but the legislative digest says this in item number 2. The California Constitution conditions the imposition of a special tax by a local government upon the approval of 2/3 of the voters of the local government voting on the tax. This measure would authorize a local government to impose, extend, or increase a sales or use tax or transaction and use tax imposed in accordance with specified laws, or a parcel tax for purposes of funding the construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, or replacement of public infrastructures, affordable housing, including down payment assistance, or permanent supportive housing, or the acquisition or lease of real property for the purposes in the propositions proposing that the tax is approved by a majority of the vote of the membership of the governing body, the local government, and by 55% of the voters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What it's going to be sold, I think, to everybody at is the funding of not our infrastructure, not the other stuff they want to do, but rather for affordable housing, because they're going to start preying upon our sympathetic hearts to be able to do stuff. And they're going to utilize that language in the advertisements you're going to see that I think that are going to try to dissuade people from what the real intent of it is. The real intent is to get away from this 2/3 vote and rather turn around to where the local government can do anything they want to. And I got to tell you, they want the money and they're going to find ways of getting the money. And right now, the homeowners are standing in their way from doing that. Prop 13 is standing in the way from that happening. So they've got to get rid of it somehow. And this is one of the ways they're doing it. So thank you for letting me interrupt you there.
Certainly, it's a chainsaw massacre. It absolutely is. You will see tax increases on your ballot in every election, and they will pass much more easily. And they will all sound like they're for something wonderful. And they will all be on your property tax bill under the line that says voter approved debt, voter approved parcel taxes, voter approved whatever. Everybody votes, only the property owners pay. And this becomes more of a problem as the pressure to move apartments into single family neighborhoods grows and more ADUs and all of the other density policies that they're doing. You're moving a lot of renters who will not be paying these taxes, or at least not directly paying them, but voting on them. So who's going to get stuck for the cost of all the infrastructure upgrades for all that density? The
Shelley,
homeowners.
I think what everybody misses is that these taxes are not just on homes, but it's on any property at all. That means
Right.
commercial properties as well. That commercial property tax gets passed on, guess to who? To us as the consumers. So it's having an effect across the board to everybody. So it needs to be watched, and it needs to be watched very carefully, because otherwise it will become a serious problem. I think your designation of being a chainsaw is probably exactly correct.
So you should be aware that in Los Angeles, specifically in LA County, they have passed 2 laws that were signed by the governor in October that will make it easier to raise taxes for homelessness again in Los Angeles. One of them is an authorization for another increase in the sales tax, another 0.5% increase in the sales tax, because we're already over the legal cap, and they have to keep authorizing it in Sacramento in order for it to go higher. And they just did another 0.5% for the sales tax for homelessness services. Probably what they're planning to do, what they've talked about, is Measure H, which was a 1/4 cent sales tax increase for 10 years, is going to become a 0.5 cent sales tax increase permanently. That seems to be what the Board of Supervisors has in mind. That's what they've talked about. And the other thing that's really even sneakier is that a year ago, there was a new agency created by legislation, which is an affordable housing agency for LA County. And it has different taxing powers than the county itself. And they just passed something this year that allows that agency to raise these taxes, to put them on the ballot and raise these taxes. And they pass with 55% because it's all related to housing or infrastructure. So if ACA 1 were to pass, they would pass with 55%. And so this agency can put these taxes on the ballot and then transfer the money to the county, which would not be allowed to issue these same taxes. And the 3 taxes that were cited by county council were a business license tax based on gross profits, based on gross revenue. So that would be bad for businesses. Parcel taxes that are not uniform, meaning that they could be written to hit businesses harder than homeowners, or they could be written to have exceptions for big voter groups like seniors or low income or whatever they want to exempt to get the votes, and then everybody else will pay the parcel tax. That's another one that they could do. And there's a third one, which escapes me at the moment, a third tax that this agency would be able to pass that the county is not allowed to do. I think it was something that they'd be able to do in the whole county instead of just the unincorporated area. So in any case, all of them would hit businesses very hard. And that is now all authorized. So watch for that on the November 2024 ballot in LA County. That'll be interesting. So the other thing that's going on, I do have some good news for you. The good news is that the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is working very hard to reverse the giant property tax increase that hits people who have just lost a parent. And this was the tax increase in Proposition 19. Now, if you remember, Proposition 19 looked like, this was on the ballot in 2020, it looked like it was about helping wildfire victims. It looked like it was about helping seniors move to a new home and keep their old tax bill. And it was, and it did, and that's fine. But in the fine print, and not in the advertising, was the biggest property tax increase in the history of California. And it hits people who have just had a death in the family. And this is the change to the parent-child transfer rules for property. Since 1986, for more than 30 years, it has been the case in California until Prop 19 that parents could pass a home of any value and a certain amount of other property to their kids without any change to the tax bill. That's gone. It's gone. It was put into the Constitution by a unanimous vote of the legislature and a vote of 75% of the electorate in 1986. And then in 1996, there was a follow-on measure that applied to grandparents and grandchildren if the children's parents were deceased. So the same rules, the home of any value and a limited amount of other property could be passed to the kids without reassessment to market value. It wasn't considered a change of ownership in the law. It was excluded from reassessment. Both of those gone, repealed in Prop 19. And the voters did not know. It's a very deceptive campaign. Prop 19 barely passed. They finished counting the votes in December of 2020. It took effect 2 months later in February, in the middle of a pandemic over the Christmas holidays. So people had no idea that this was happening. There was this enormous scramble to try and get these things filed and get these changes of ownership recorded. Most people didn't even know what was going on. And here's how they're finding out. Somebody passes away and you go and get your mail, and mixed in with the sympathy cards is a letter from the tax assessor saying that the property is being reassessed to market value. Now, if it's a principal residence of the parent and the child makes it their own principal residence within a year and fills out all the paperwork within the year and gets it all filed correctly, there is an exclusion of an additional $1 million of value. But in many parts of California, including Los Angeles, that doesn't go very far. So you get an exclusion for your current assessed value plus $1 million. And if it's worth more than that market value, then everything above that is assessed at market value and added to the old assessment, which is a long way of saying that even if you move in to your parents' home when you inherit it, you could still get a tax increase of thousands of dollars a year. And if you don't move in or you can't move in, it's reassessed to market value with no exclusion at all as of the date of transfer. Even if you want to sell it, between the date that you inherit it and the close of escrow, you owe property taxes on the market value of that property, which is a huge bill. And what this does to apartment buildings, all those mom and pop owned apartment buildings, all those small businesses where the family owns the property as well as the business, reassess to market value as of the date of transfer. Think about all these restaurants that were people just hanging on by their fingernails through the pandemic. And now they have a big loan because they had to build a patio and they're just hanging on. And the older generation passes and the kids inherit the property, reassessed to current market value. That new tax bill is going to drive them out of business. And the apartment buildings, what happens to the tenants? When the apartment building in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, everywhere in California, San Jose, San Diego, these little apartment buildings, 4 units, 9 units, built in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, family owned. The older generation passes, the younger generation inherits, the tenants are in the street because nobody can make that business pencil out if those rents are rent controlled.
It sounds like what you say with all the stuff that happens, you can almost put in at the end of it. The result is you're going to pay more taxes. And no matter what it is they do, you're going to pay more taxes. And that's the mantra that's going on. And the question is whether or not we're getting enough out of our present taxes that are being collected. I think we saw that with some of the news reports that were going on, specifically yesterday with the mayor, with her 1-year review, and what's going on with the homelessness and how much money has been spent on trying to get people off the streets. And only, I think the numbers were something like about 1,900 she was able to get into some kind of permanent housing. And the bills were extraordinarily high. The monies that they've spent at that point in time. And her justification was, well, there's other people we have to pay. We got to pay the people that have to come in and clean up the streets. We have to pay the police to watch over them while they're doing that. And so therefore it was much more expensive. So it's not X number of dollars for putting them in the house. It's really less than that because all this other stuff is for other things, not just for how. The problem is we're spending money and thinking that we're doing better and feeling better about ourselves, but we really are not getting anything for it. Certainly not what they're promising, not what we've been expecting to get. And that creates real problems to it. And I know with some that are listening, it sounds like this is doom and gloom, but I think that there are some areas that we can begin to help with this. And I think Shelley's going to tell us about some of those, but the major thing, yeah, there you go. The major thing is that first get informed with it. And as I was listening to what's going on here, Shelley, and reading through this stuff too, I'm going, we're going to open this up to questions fairly soon. I'm going, how do you ask any questions about this stuff? It's kind of going, the only question really is does this mean they're going to raise taxes? The answer is yes. Well, what other questions are there really about? Who's doing it? Why are they doing it? It's tough to even ask questions about what's going on to it. But nonetheless, I think that we're going to open this up to questions here in a bit. But Shelley, I want you to talk also about Before I do that, if I may, just take one more moment to it. I just happened to look at some of the things that are circulating around now to go on the ballots, which is kind of craziness now to think of what's going on. And if you don't watch this stuff, you're going to see your entire the things that you think that are normal will no longer be normal anymore. And some of them are trying to correct that. A few of the things that are going on, obviously, legalizing mushrooms is coming back up. The repeal of the voter elected change to the property tax you just talked about that was destroying old Prop 19. Electronic signatures being okay for gathering initiative and referendums and recall petitions. Tell me that's not going to be fraught with all kind of problems. There's, I think, two or so propositions are circulating around, initiatives circulating to increase and make sure that the schools are of high quality. It's constitutional amendments too, by the way. Other ones that would limit the state's ability to get statewide land use and housing policies. I think that's going to be an interesting. That's another constitutional amendment. As you know, the state has been trying to take away our abilities to have local control over that. That may be one, and I want to read that in more detail, that may be able to stop some of that and give that local control back to us to where that the state legislature is not going to have that control as much as what they can have over the local communities. And doing that by a constitutional amendment might be an interesting way to go. Mind you, these are initiatives to go on the ballot, and they require signatures to get onto that. Now we're going to talk to Shelley about that in a second. There are some that are, for government to issue IDs to voters before they can vote. Basically, a voter ID constitutional amendment for California. Gender restrictions for playing sports to only binary gendered individuals. Restrictions on gendered medical care under 18 to affirm gender identities. Bottom line is there are things that are being done to try to correct some of the issues that are going on. Whether or not they'll ever come to pass or not is going to depend upon the voters that are out there and the people that, first of all, will go out and sign those petitions to make sure they're going to get back on. I'm going to go back to you now and be quiet for a bit, Shelley, while you talk about, Miss Shelley, so you can talk about how these things can happen. And listen, Miss Shelley has been around this stuff so long. She knows the ins and outs of this stuff. It boggles the mind sometimes, but she has abilities to like clarify it. The clarification right now is, what do we do? Back to you, Susan.
Okay, well, what we're doing is we're collecting signatures on an initiative petition to amend the Constitution to put back what was lost. The right for parents to transfer a home of any value and up to $1 million of assessed value of other property to their kids excluded from reassessment. And it is retroactive. So if this was adopted by the voters, anyone who was reassessed for a parent-child transfer while this was in effect, Prop 19 was in effect, they would be able to get their original assessed value reinstated so that going forward, their taxes would be cut again. So this is really important. And it's not just important, as I mentioned, for homeowners and their kids, for business owners, for apartment dwellers, for apartment owners. It's also important to build generational wealth in communities that have been disadvantaged historically, because real estate is how you build wealth from generation to generation. That's how you do it. You build with a 30-year mortgage, buying real estate. And what has happened with Prop 19 is that in many areas of Los Angeles, in the Black community, in the Hispanic community, people who own houses as an investment, where they have a rental home, where they have a small apartment building, or even a duplex, it's getting reassessed to market value, and the kids can't keep it because they can't come up with those, they can't pay the bills for those taxes. Property taxes are every year as a condition of keeping what you already own, which make them very different than an estate tax, which is once, or an income tax, which is once on the way in, and a sales tax once on the way out. Property tax every year. So if you own a home that's somewhere near SoFi Stadium, which is suddenly more valuable, and your kids inherit it, but they can't move into it because they live somewhere else, they can't keep it. What if it's rented? What happens to those tenants? Out they go, because that property has to be sold because the kids can't come up with the money to pay those taxes on $1.5 million house, which was $600,000 just a few years ago. They can't come up with the money to pay those taxes every year. So what happens to the generational wealth? Sure, you sell the house, you have the cash, but the cash loses value to inflation. The asset appreciates and somebody else owns it. What a rotten trick to do to these communities. to gentrify and evict all these tenants who are living in rental properties. It's really unspeakable. This is just a terrible policy. So what we're doing,
Tell us
what we're
about
doing
the
is a
signatures.
petition.
How do they get a hold of those to be able to sign that and to circulate them around if they wish to?
You go to repealthedeathtax.com, repealthedeathtax.com, REPEAL, repealthedeathtax.com. You click download the petition. You get a 5-page PDF file. It's a cover sheet, complete color illustrated instructions, a flyer that explains what it's about with some links to the voter registration site, the check your registration site, the website, the donation site, and then a legal statement about who's paying for the signature collection, which is the Repeal the Death Tax Committee, a project of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. No big funders on this. And then the petition itself, which is 1 page. It fits on letter-sized paper, 1 side, 1 page. You can print this at home. You can print this in your office. You can go to Staples and they'll download and print it for you. It's got room for 2 signatures. All you do is you write in the county, you fill it in with your name and address as registered to vote, you sign it, you fill in this little declaration of circulator, which normally the person with the clipboard in front of the supermarket would fill in, but you are your own circulator with this. You download this petition, you print it at home, you fill it in, takes 10 minutes, you mail it back. So what we are doing is we are launching statewide radio ads. They launch Friday morning everywhere in the state of California. You will be hearing them everywhere in the state of California, telling people about this. And we also have a Friday night radio show on KSFO and KSFO.com. KSFO is AM in the Bay Area. KSFO, of course, is streaming everywhere, KSFO.com. We're pounding the table with this message to go to the repealthedeathtax.com site, download the petition, email that link to all your friends and family, text it to everyone in your phone, let them know that this is a way to reverse this very destructive tax increase. It takes about 1 million signatures. The actual number is 875,000 valid signatures, so it takes more than 1 million to make sure you have enough. And we need them by January 16th because we have to process all that paper. So we're asking everyone to get them back to us in the middle of January. And they're piling up in the Sacramento office. People are sending them back. The word is getting out. It's very difficult to qualify a statewide initiative. It's very difficult to pay for professional signature gatherers at the current rates because of AB5. Now everyone's an employee in those companies that used to have contractors. So it got much more expensive and much more difficult. And also people are not so willing to talk to signature gatherers outside of supermarkets in the COVID era, the post-COVID era. People are a little more agitated about picking up someone else's ballpoint pen or talking to strangers. So we think that's actually the silver lining here, is that while it's become more difficult to collect signatures at the supermarket, more people are technologically set up in their houses to do calls like this, Zoom calls with their friends and family, and more set up to click a link and print something at home and fill it out and sign it. It has to be paper and ink. You can download it from the internet, but you can't sign it on the internet because the initiative law dates to 1911. So if they didn't have it in 1911, we can't use it. It's paper, ink, and a stamp.
Yeah, the wet signatures we call it. These are wet signatures.
That's right, wet signatures.
I
blue or black ink.
Yeah, blue or black ink is correct. I think that what most people don't realize, I did not know it until I was doing the work with Valley Cityhood, that the people who are out there that are collecting those signatures are generally paid people. They come in from all over, from different states. They're not just necessarily people that are here locally. There's a whole group. It's almost like workers that run around with harvesting the fruits that are going on. You know, one of the oranges growing in this particular state will go there. It's sort of the same thing. They go from state to state to harvest that. Some of them are very, very good at it. They're relentless with it. Some of them have been annoying in that process to it. You're much better off on circulating those to your friends and your family so that they're not going to be irritated by it, and you can obviously make sure the signature is going to be better on them, and they have to be qualified on those signatures to it. The Woodland Hills Homeowners has not taken a position on this particular one yet. We probably will as time goes on, although we have to do that fairly quickly because your timing is running out. These are the type of things, however, that are part and parcel of what we look at in protecting our own homes and the quality of our homes in our community. So take a good look at it. Shelley, what's that website again for them to get to? And then we can go to some questions.
Okay, repealthedeathtax.com, repealthedeathtax.com.
Okay, and is there any expenditures that they have to make for doing this? Is there
Yeah.
any monies they have to make it? Are you gonna hound them for donations or things of that nature?
Well, everybody's welcome to donate if they would like to. It's
Okay.
a campaign committee under California law.
Mhm.
It's not tax deductible. It's a standard political donation under California law. But we really have enough money to do what we need to do. We've paid for our radio campaign. Obviously, the more we raise, the more we can do. This is kind of an experiment to see if grassroots politics can overcome the hurdles in politics today. California is a very expensive market in which to advertise, as you know, and it's a very big state, and 1 million signatures is a lot of paper. So this method is logistically very different than what we tried to do last year. Last year, we had professionally printed 14-inch petitions. We were shipping them out to people and they were coming back. It was slow and much more logistically complicated and much more expensive, frankly, to do that. So we are trying it this way to see if we can inform people, go mind to mind by talking to them and telling them what this is, and getting people to understand how important it is and how easy it is to sign the petition and send it in. And if we can do that, there are a lot of things that grassroots political organizations can do in California that don't seem possible now.
And I think that that's probably the lesson of all of this is that we actually can do something, and you just have to know what it is to do and to get informed about that. We'll take some hands up if people want to do some questions on some things too. Uh, Shelley, I understand that you do a radio show too. Is that right?
I do actually 2 radio shows.
Well,
The
tell me
Howard
about that.
The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association does a podcast, which I do with John Kupal, who is the president of HJTA, and I'm the VP of communications for them. And we do a podcast, which is broadcast on Monday nights on KABC as a radio show. So you can catch that on KABC 790 in Los Angeles. Every Monday night at 8 is when that's on. And the other show that we're doing now is for Repeal the Death Tax. We call that the Repeal the Death Tax Petition Party. And that is 6 o'clock on Friday, broadcast in the Bay Area and streaming live everywhere on ksfo.com.
KFFO.com.
KS, San Francisco, KSFO,
KSF.
KSFO.com.
.com.
Streaming live, 6 p.m. We'll take your calls. We'll answer your questions.
Well, that's good. Well, this is a tough one to ask questions about. We will take, if somebody has questions, go ahead and raise your hand for that. We'll take questions on this. It is a hard one to come up with questions, honestly, on this. Susan, to be honest with you, the question I think really comes down to is what is going on? You just were up in Sacramento not too long ago with a meeting up there. Tell us a little about that. What went on? What did you learn? What first? Why were you up there? Who went up there with you? And what did you learn while you were up there?
Well, it was the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association Taxpayer Conference. And we invited a lot of people up and down the state to come to the Citizen Hotel for this conference. We had many guest speakers. Assembly Minority Leader James Gallagher was there and spoke about what's going on in the legislature and how they're trying to raise all your taxes again. And someone who is an election lawyer, Ashley Titus with Bell McAndrews and Hilltack, spoke to the group about all of the complexities of campaign finance law and all the things to watch out for. It's very complicated in California. The First Amendment is only partially in effect here when it comes to campaigns. It's if you print flyers, you might get investigated for not having an advertising disclaimer, even though you may not be required to put an advertising disclaimer on it under the law. So she was explaining all of that. And then we had some people talking about this Taxpayer Protection Act and the litigation around it from the governor and the legislature suing to get it knocked off the ballot. Talked a little bit about that and how the courts might react to that. You know, there was I thought a really interesting discussion of what some conservatives see as the politicization of the judiciary in California. They have been ruling against taxpayers so consistently, and there was just open speculation about whether the Supreme Court of California would essentially do whatever the governor asked because of political considerations, or whether they would not. They would stick to the text of the Constitution and rule consistent with precedents. It was rather interesting to hear people who practice law in that district talking about the judiciary potentially caving to the politics of not wanting to cross the governor. And that's kind of sobering, really, if you think about it.
And there's been an attack on the judiciary for a long time, and very honestly, there's a new group that's coming out of the law schools that are now beginning to move into those positions that a bit frightening. I know I saw it start changing really in the early 90s. The crew that was coming out of law schools were different than what I was raised with, and it's changed. And those people now are sitting on the bench, and some are moving up into higher levels to that. Looks like I see we have a hand raised. If I'm not mistaken, that is by Gavin Stokes. Is that right? Gavin, let's see what we can do with here to get you logged in here. There we go. Gavin, you can unmute yourself.
Yep.
Go ahead, ask your question, sir.
Okay, sure. I don't know that it's directly related, but one thing that occurs to me after the having bought a house near the beginning of the pandemic and watching the prices go up astronomically and the massive turnover in homes over the last few years, it would seem to me that the state must be flush with property taxes at extremely high property values now. They've all been reset to much higher levels, and there's been a huge amount of turnover. So I never see any mention of this. And I was wondering if that might afford us some, at least PR ammunition to fight attempts to change the law. Because it seems to me that the state should be flush with new property tax money. Is that true? And why aren't we hearing about that?
Well, it is true. And if you look at the annual report from each of the county assessors, you can see that the property tax roll is increasing in total value every year. And even if you look nationally, for all the talk about Prop 13 holding down property taxes, we are 14th out of 50 in per capita property tax collections for just the reason that you mentioned, that people who have recently bought have these high prices. But without Prop 13, they'd be paying even higher taxes because Prop 13 cut the tax rate. It was 2.67% statewide average, multiplied by the market value of your home every year. Imagine paying that 2.67% of the market value of your home reset every year. That's what it was before 1978 in California. And now it's 1% instead of the average 2.6. It was 3% in some of the cities. It's just completely unaffordable, and no one can control the value of property. So you're right. They are flush with money from property taxes, and there's tremendous stability from Prop 13 because even in a recession, you still get that 2% increase in the roll just from the inflation reset plus the turnover. So it is true. But if I may speak candidly, there are people in California politics, there are powerful organizations that prefer to blame Prop 13 for what is really overspending by the government, because the budget has increased and increased and increased. The spending has gone up and up and up. And so it's not really the taxpayers' fault. We are paying the highest income taxes, highest state sales tax, highest gas tax, highest corporate tax, I think, west of the Rockies. We are paying very high taxes in California. And as you said, property taxes are very significant too. Even if you have a long held home under Prop 13, you are paying all those extra charges, the parcel taxes, the bonds, all of that stuff. It's a lot, and it goes up every year. And if these other attempts to amend the Constitution go through, it's going to go up even faster. So it's something to watch. People are leaving this state. That's real. They are leaving this state. And we've lost a congressional seat. There's no denying that this is happening. People are leaving California, and they're going to states that have thriving economies and lower taxes. And we could do that here.
The inefficiency, I think, of government is what strikes us all. That when you look at the budget just for the city of Los Angeles, we're in billions of dollars. Look for the LA Unified School District, we're in billions of dollars again on that. It's really pretty tough to recognize that those monies not really being watched over, and they come back and they say, let's give me some more because I want to do something, and they'll sell it to us in one way or another to make us feel better about ourselves on what they're spending it on. But we're talking billions and billions of dollars, and the state of California had surpluses a number of years ago and don't have it anymore. So what happens when they spend those monies? they come back and try to find some more. What has always bothered me, and I see it happening right now with some of the little smaller funds that some of our council members have, that if they don't spend it in their within the year that it's given to them, they lose it. And so what happens? What do? They spend it. It doesn't matter what they're spending it on. Sometimes on foolish things when they really could be putting it over to the next year and spending it on something they really knew because they can't do it right now at this point. Scott, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. I see you got a question as well. Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
All right. Shelley, I want to say thank you for being here. I apologize for being late. I couldn't figure out how to get online, but I did.
I'm sympathetic.
Sounds like a personal problem there, Scott.
So I actually have a couple of comments I'd like to make regarding this whole scenario. First, you mentioned generational wealth. And as you know, what you were right about generational wealth, and the city and the politicians are pushing for more apartments. And apartments do not create generational wealth. As a matter of fact, they pull the money out of the pool that could create generational wealth. So all these new apartments that are going in are not going to help in the long run. It's going to help the developers, but it's not going to help the public in the long run because they're not building generational wealth.
That's right. That's
Now,
exactly right.
I'm a commercial real estate broker and 39 years in the business. And I could tell you the split tax roll, or as we call it, that is going to be passed through to all of our expenses. First of all, you walk on the street and you see all these little retail mom and pop shops, and their leases, what they call triple net leases. All the expenses of that property get passed through to the tenants.
That's right.
And then the tenants have to pass through the expenses to the consumers. So right now, the retail industry, it's in big trouble. And this is only going to add to that burden of trying to keep the doors open. And eventually it's going to all get passed down to the consumers. By the way, you mentioned a 1% tax bill. It's 1% tax bill, but we use 1.3% because of all the other voter fees that are on the tax bill that you can't get out of.
Right.
You're stuck with them. Everything from the mosquito abatement to whatever. But it's 1%. It's kind of misleading.
Yes, it's 1% plus. You're right.
1% plus, yes. Just to give you an idea in the commercial industry where things are right now, there's a building that just sold in Glendale, a large building, and it's sold for many millions of dollars. It's going to be a huge ULA tax, the mansion tax on it, but it's sold for $163 a square foot. Can I tell you, it cost $350 a foot to build it.
Oh my.
The banks are going to take hits on this really significantly. Again, that's going to get passed down to the consumer. On these taxes are just they're nonstop. They're going to keep building. Mm-hmm. And the worst part is you're talking about how they deal with the money, and they have to spend the money. They do what's called, it's fungible accounting, right? It's like the lottery. When we were offered the lottery, we were told that it was going to supply the schools with $9 billion of extra income. Well, I tell you what, it did. It provided the schools $9 billion of income. But the politicians reduced what they provide to the schools by $9 billion. So it was a net zero gain. So the schools are not saying that, the schools are saying, we don't have any money. Well, it's the politicians that took the money from the schools and they put it in their pet projects.
Yeah, Scott, I think everybody realizes what they really did in that situation was they really raised taxes is what they did. They just called it one thing, and then they just moved it from the general fund into something else they were going to do. It was just an increase in taxes, allowed them to do other things they were going to do. They do that all the time with stuff. They move things around from account to account to try to do the stuff they want to. Then they cry poverty and they want more monies for it. And it's unfortunate, Scott, but we've got to at some point in time recognize that what they're doing, they've got money and they should be able to live within those means and find a way to do it. And they just, the old phrase about kicking the can down the road, they do what they're going to do, spend the monies now, and they worry about somebody else taking care of it later on. Scott, you mentioned before to me, I think we had a conversation about what's going on with the commercial market and with the taxes. As we know, with what's happened now with Prop 13 and I'm sorry, not with Prop 2, with COVID coming in, and with us all being back at home and not in the commercial areas, um, we don't know what's going to happen with rental anymore. My cat's just come in, by the way. So, the rentals now at this point are going to change on whether people are going to be actually going back into commercial properties or wanting to go into residential. And I think there's going to be a shift that's going to go into that. I think your comment about that generational wealth being destroyed is interesting, because people are not going to have those houses they're going to own. A lot of the younger generation doesn't want them. They say it's just too much for them to figure out. We don't want to cut the lawn. We don't want to have those responsibilities. So we will rent instead at that point in time. But they're losing that abilities to create wealth on leveraged wealth, where you're borrowing money. You put down a down payment, but you're borrowing money, and the properties increase in value. Well, the increase in value is on your deposit, really, and it goes up rather quickly. You're earning a lot of money on the deposit, far better than you can ever do in any place else. But yet that's being lost, and people don't want to get into some of these houses now because the expenses on these taxes are just going to be too high. Am I off base, or is that what you're seeing as well?
You're on base, but it's slightly skewed. We have the ability to do this right now. If the politicians would grow a backbone and say no more apartments, but we want to have units for sale, let them build condominiums, let them build co-ops, let them build something where the people that live there can build generational wealth, not apartments by these merchant builders that come into the area, build something that's completely out of character, and sell it and move on. That's how it operates.
Yeah.
But generational wealth is so important. That's actually one of the problems with the racial divide, because all those years early on in the deeds of properties restricted the sale of those properties to certain demographics. That in turn stole the ability for them to create generational wealth. And that's something that's still going on right now, maybe not by law, but is going on by legislation.
Susan, are you seeing that out of what your meetings you had up in Sacramento, that this desire, if you will, for doing these taxation, what have you, and destroying the single family residence, it is really just basically government taking over control of everything, to where we just don't have those abilities to have any kind of wealth that develops and can't stand up against the forces of government anymore?
You know, if I could change one thing in California, and only one thing, there's a lot of things I would change, but if I could change just one thing, I would tear down the so-called urban boundary that is preventing the development of housing in outlying areas. What we have is, because of the fear that driving in California is wrecking the global climate, which is not accurate. Nothing that we drive in California affects the global climate. It's not enough to affect the global climate, and China's building coal plants. So we're not affecting the climate. But in the belief that we are, or that we should show leadership and model this behavior for the world, we are preventing housing construction in outlying areas where land is more affordable and where you could be building new communities, which is what was done after World War II, when you had a tremendous housing crisis. When everybody came home from that war and these new households formed, there was a huge housing crisis. And the way they fixed it was with financing and outlying development. And we could do that too. But we have stopped doing that since roughly 2006, 2008, because of our climate laws in California. So if I could change just one thing, I would tear down that urban boundary, and I would let people build housing in California where it makes sense to build it.
You know, it's interesting for you to say that, Susan. We got back from Vegas, and the northern part of Vegas, where one of the grandkids has moved to, and the development out there is just enormous. And I expected it to be, I don't know, just kind of outlying areas and people that were just kind of in the suburbs, and it was so. It is just a phenomenal developments they've got going out there. The freeways that run through are superb, and hardly anybody on them, very frankly. They've got all these organized developments of the housing stuff. When you go into a location and the developments have got restaurants that were intended to be there, that the communities basically support, and the developments that are around from a commercial standpoint serve all their particular needs on things, to where, you know, the old adage in most of the urban designers, where you should live and work and play within about a 6-mile radius of where you actually live. They're able to do it there because they have these planned communities basically that have popped up in those particular locations. And it doesn't seem that we need to have tax structures to do that, but rather let the economy do it. Let the developers that come in those particular areas that have that they're putting their own backs at risk and their bank accounts too, and say, all right, we've got an idea of what things should be done here, and let's get this stuff done, and not just be raising taxes to where everybody's just taxed out of the state and have to go someplace else. And we're losing the brain trust even from the state at that point.
Exactly. Look how long it has taken for the Tahoe Ranch development in northern LA County to move forward. I don't think have they broken ground on any of those houses yet? They announced it when Schwarzenegger was governor, and I don't think they've built a house yet because of all of the restrictions on everything and the expenses that the government puts on housing development. So if you do that, and then you subsidize or encourage or mandate density where people don't want density, now what you've got is corrosive politics and everybody at each other's throats, which is what we have in Los Angeles.
Well, I think
And
that
it doesn't have to be like this.
A lot of us, and Scott, you probably chime in on this one too. A lot of the stuff with what's happened out of Sacramento are allowing the single family residence properties to be divided up to where they can build apartments on that. You can have an apartment all of a sudden start popping up next to you in a residential location.
By right.
By right, to where you can't really do anything on it. Right now, at least in a lot of areas, you can at least try to make sure that what they're going to put up is going to be appropriate for the location, that can be handled by the infrastructure, et cetera. But otherwise, you can have these things pop up in your own neighborhood, and there goes your property values. There goes that generational equity that goes on too, and we begin to lose that. I see we got a couple of questions. Scott, you got some more questions for us too?
No, that's good. Thank you, John.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. Chris Rowe, I see you there. I will allow you to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Chris. I'm going to unpin you there, Scott.
First of all, I want to say, you guys keep calling her Shelley, but her name's Susan.
It's okay. Everybody does that. It's okay. Thank you, Chris, but everybody does that.
Yeah, but it's Susan Shelley, and Susan, didn't you run for Congress as well as Assembly?
I did. I got into this racket by running there. That was the first thing I did as I ran for Congress.
I saw you at that debate over at Promenade Mall.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
It's quite an experience.
So this is one thing you and I disagree on, Susan, and I appreciate everything that you educated us about, like the death tax and everything today. But this is what I want to say. So as I was looking at John's background and looking at the mountains, so for example, to the north of us, we have Porter Ranch and stuff. We have an oil field that goes all along there. We, of course, have Aliso Canyon. Nobody should have ever been allowed to build in that area because we need that storage facility for natural gas right now. I don't believe that the average person, the middle class people or lower, whatever, can afford to convert all our homes to solar or electric. There's justifications why not. That's number one. Number two, you go south to Santa Monica Mountains, and we need to preserve trees because we have the worst air quality in terms of ozone in the United States. So we need our green spaces. We need our Santa Monica Mountains as a buffer for helping to clean our air. And so what I'm saying to you is that there is justification for keeping, not building into the Santa Monica Mountain Range or other areas that are restricted. I can't speak for going out towards Santa Clarita, the areas, because I haven't been out there in a very long time. But what I'm saying is, if you look around the San Fernando Valley, I absolutely disagree about the boundaries there. And as you know, as you go south more, you're in more crowded areas and different demographics. And also, as you go into Orange County and further south, it gets more expensive. But anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you're absolutely right, no one's talking about building housing in protected areas like the Santa Monica Mountains recreation area. But if you get on the freeway, if you get on the 5 freeway and you drive between roughly Santa Clarita and Stockton, there's a lot of land in California where housing could be built. And you know, if we were living in the 1960s when people wanted to build things and they wanted to build water infrastructure and water storage and aqueducts, and they wanted to build roads and they wanted to build homes, if we had that mindset, we could be solving this housing affordability crisis. We could solve this. It's a supply and demand problem, and we could solve it. But the mindset is scarcity, scarcity, higher prices, scarcity. And that is causing more problems than it solves, in
And
my
density
opinion.
too. Now the mantra is density. Let's just increase density. And by the way, since there's transportation around, which doesn't work, you don't have to have parking for them. We'll put them out on the
Right.
street or someplace else or up in other neighborhoods or what have you.
So
And it's
that's
becoming,
corrosive also. That makes people very agitated.
it does. That's for sure. Jeff Bornstein, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, John.
You got it. Good to see you, by the way. Or
Good to see
hear
you too. Good to see you. You know, with all the taxes we have in California, should we, and really John brought it up with the Vegas and the booming success they have here, should we legalize gambling in California to offset some of the taxes here?
You know, that's a very interesting question. We had this battle on the ballot over sports gaming and whether it would be offered at Dodger Stadium or it would be offered in the card rooms or it would be offered in the Indian casinos. And those things went down to defeat like 80-20. I've never seen anything get beaten as badly as some of those gambling initiatives. So I don't really know. There's a lot of people trying to carve up the money from it, and they don't seem to have a proposal to cleanly legalize gambling, you know, just legalize it. It's always something like only here, only there, only with this and only with that. One of the proposals had all of the data going to the Attorney General so the office could determine who was a problem gambler. I don't know that that's a great idea to have all of your data going to the Attorney General's office every time you bet on a game. So it's a complicated question. It probably shouldn't be a complicated question, but in California politics, it is a complicated question.
It's just turning down money. That's all. Just turning down money.
Seems
Yeah.
to be. Chris Rowe, you've got another question. Go ahead. You're unmuted. You can go ahead and talk again. Thank you, Jeff, by the way.
Yeah, so, well,
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have.
yeah,
about
Susan
that.
brought, you're okay. So Susan brought up that area, and as we go out up the 5, and I used to go up that way to go to Boy Scout camp and stuff up in Kern County and things like that years ago. We're talking decades here, but the point is, high-speed rail. I would be interested in the position if you guys have taken a position, or Susan. You know, we gotta also recognize Susan's involvement with Valley Vote, which I used to go to years ago, and thank her for that service to
Aw,
our
thank you, Chris.
community.
Thank you very much.
I know what you've been doing, Susan. So, what are your thoughts about the high-speed rail coming into the valley?
The high-speed rail coming into the high-speed rail isn't coming into the valley. It's not going anywhere. It's going between Merced and Bakersfield. Currently, in 2008, the voters approved about $10 billion in borrowed money for a train that was promised from San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2.5 hours without a tax increase or a public subsidy. Here's what it is right now. You take conventional, when they finish it, you take conventional rail from the Bay Area to Merced. You take the high-speed rail from Merced to Bakersfield. Then you get on the high-speed rail bus, a bus in Bakersfield, which takes you into Los Angeles. Really? And this is going to be, I think, $128 billion. You know, they had a federal grant from the Federal Railroad Administration, and it required a certain number of miles of track to be built by a date certain in order for them to continue to keep that money and not have to refund it. So here's what they did. They very cleverly figured out, because they didn't own all the land yet that they needed to build the thing, that they would add up the track on the non-contiguous parcels, and it would total the right number of miles. And they told the federal government they'd met the terms of the grant. And the federal government said, oh, I guess you have. So non-contiguous rail, the last time I checked, unless you're wearing track shoes and you're going to get out and push the thing, that's not high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles. So I think it's a boondoggle. I think it's all about union jobs and land deals in Fresno. And I just think it's the worst part of it is that it's being funded with a hidden tax. It was not supposed to be built with a tax increase, but it's being built with the cap and trade money, which is a hidden tax on energy. So when you buy gasoline, when you pay your electric bill, when you buy anything in California that was moved by truck, you are paying this cap and trade hidden tax, which is designed once again to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which makes no difference in the global climate. It's just for leadership. So you are paying for this in California, and 25% of that money is going to build the bullet train. So it is being built with a tax, only it's not legally called a tax. So I think it's raising the cost of living in California. When you raise the price of everything, the sales tax goes up with it, so your taxes are going up. And it's just, in my opinion, it's a swindle. I would cancel it if I was in charge.
It's pretty annoying to see that the state legislature in Sacramento is doing this to us down here in the South. They're not giving us any of the things we really need down here. I wonder, it's my personal opinion now that, and it seems to be that the northern part of the state, San Francisco on up, really dislikes us down here. They are,
Yes, they do.
we are just not, we're second-class citizens as far as they're concerned, and we're just the money pit for them. I mean, that's the deep pockets dip into us to be able to get the monies they need for their other little games that they like to be playing around. If they could find some way to get rid of us, they certainly would. I know I see it as an attorney going up to Sacramento and up in San Francisco, not treated terribly nicely up there. It's kind of strange, very frankly. Um, uh, Susan, have you seen that there is a lack of a good, I'll call it a coalition of our legislators in the Southern California area to really do battle, so to speak, or to go up into Sacramento and try to get things done? It's the impression we're having is that they're disjointed. They don't really know what they're not that they don't know what they're doing. They're just not working together to try to get something done. They kind of have their own little independent things they're trying to do, and nobody's working together to try to stop what's going on up in Sacramento. That's basically hurting us. And I see that with what happened with Prop 9, Prop 10, Senate Bill Prop 9 and 10, taking away our local control over things. And I just cannot imagine that our local politicians, whether it be on the city council or whether it be our representative, didn't do something, basically stand up and said, absolutely not. How dare you? We've done a good job here on trying to take care of ourselves. What is your take on what's going on in Sacramento? You've been up there. You got your ear down to the rails on politics. What the heck is going on?
Well, that was SB 9 and SB 10. And for anybody who's not familiar with them, SB 9 is the lot split by right, where you can take a single family lot anywhere in the state, split it into two, put 2 houses and 2 ADUs on it. And actually you can have more than that because a garage apartment would be additional. So you could actually have 6 residences on what was a single family home. And you could do that by right virtually everywhere in California. There are a few restrictions on how big the lot has to be, but basically by right, anywhere in the state, you can do that. And this is the end of single family zoning. That's what the advocates called it. They said this is abolishing single family zoning in California. And SB 10 says that if a city wants to adopt an ordinance that says so, they can allow a 10-unit apartment building to be built on a single family lot, what is now a single family lot, a 10-unit apartment building with 4 ADUs behind it. So a total of 14 households on a lot with the infrastructure for 1 family. And you can do that anywhere that you're within half a mile of transit as defined. And it's defined as a bus stop. So, and it doesn't even have to be a bus stop that's there right now. It could be a pencil drawing at Metro of where they're going to put the bus stop. And you can have an ordinance that says on any single family lot, you can build a 10-unit apartment and 4 ADUs. They almost did this in San Diego. The mayor of San Diego wanted an ordinance. He favored an ordinance to do this. And I'll just say that the political pressure must have been pretty intense because he reversed course and did not do it. And I would expect that that would happen everywhere. But to your question about why do the legislators who represent us not stand up for us, I don't have a good answer for that. I think we need more balance in Sacramento. We need real debates. What we have right now is kind of special interest inside backroom negotiations. That's how it is when you have a one-party dominated government. Doesn't matter which party, you're going to have backroom negotiations within the players. You don't have real checks and balances. And that's what we need, is real checks and balances. Because as we all know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's not an original thought with me. So
And it seems to
what
be
we
the
have.
case too. If we have more questions, put up your hands at this point. We're beginning to run close to the hour here at this point on rather detailed, difficult stuff. I mean, but you have to recognize this affects all of us and is probably at the heart of government. You know, the concept, and the old law school adage, the concept of being able to tax is the ability to destroy.
Sure is.
And that is, you know, that was one of the axioms that we looked at in law school initially. That's a serious power that the government has. And that taxation power does exactly that. It allows the government to make decisions for us of what our morality is to be, whether it be taxations, whether it be on tobacco or on alcohol or on certain activities that might be done, or whether or not we're going to have single family houses or we're not, and we're going to throw everybody into what the buildings that I saw when I was in Prague that were put there by the communist government that was there, these concrete structures that just had no soul to them. Were they housing? They were housing, but that's where everybody lived, and that's just what they had. So that ability to tax is that ability to modify what we're doing, and our structure is also the ability to destroy. And I'm afraid it's destroying that wealth, that generational wealth that's been developed. It's also destroying the population of this state. They're moving to other locations. We're losing a lot of people, and a lot of businesses are going out. And I cannot imagine why some businesses want to stay here unless we take some serious actions, like you have suggested, Shelley, on dealing with some of these initiatives and getting out there and doing some work with those ballots. What was that? Give us that website again on that one, Shelley.
Repealthedeathtax.com. Repealthedeathtax.com.
I think it would behoove everybody to take a look at that. And again, we're not pushing from an organizational standpoint from that. You can probably pick up where our personal ideas are in these particular areas, but nonetheless, these are things that we have to watch. Some of them you may not like, and that's what democracy is all about. Get out there and do your work to be able to make sure it's going to happen. So I'm not seeing any more questions at this point. At this stage, I think we've kind of, this horse is crying out not to be beaten anymore, I'm afraid. On this particular evening, it's a tough subject. Anything that's going to go on the ballots are tough. I would say this, that from a lawyer standpoint, the initiatives and propositions were intended for areas where the legislature could not act or would not act. And what's happened, unfortunately, is it's in place. It's now come about to replace what our legislators are supposed to be doing. And a lot of these things are coming up now at this point, which we have to take a serious look at, is really trying to correct some of the things that the legislatures were doing based upon the special interest. And mind you, all of us are special interests. We as homeowners are special interest. We're interested in protecting our home, protecting our community, protecting that right and safety that we have in our location where we live. So we're special interests too. But these other special interests seem to have an interest that's adverse to ours, and it's really adverse to the democratic principles we have, at least for this country. And hopefully that will change, and times will change on that. In the meantime, we do have I have a hand that's up. Kathleen Field, we're gonna definitely get to you because I like the fact we have some questions. You were unmuted, I believe. Kathleen, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for choosing me. I have a question about the voting and what organizations that I can join to prevent the voting from being derailed. I know that when Gavin Newsom was up for recall, the County of Los Angeles, who was since found in error, threw out 26% of the ballots on highly technical grounds. And those same grounds were not applied when Gavin Newsom was running for governor. So the County of Los Angeles has been found, I believe it was by court case, John, maybe you are familiar with this, but the court ruled that the recall was invalid and therefore
You're talking about the George Gascon recall.
It was
excuse
the
me,
Gascon
I beg,
Yeah.
yeah, I got my people
okay.
mixed.
We read between the lines.
That's
Okay, thank you. So there's two parts to that. Number one, where are we on that particular issue? Also, is there a possibility that he can be recalled? And then finally, for a person who is very worried about what we can do to protect the vote, what organizations do you suggest that I contact?
Well, the Election Integrity Project is one of California. Election Integrity Project California is one. Linda Payne runs that, and that's a great organization. There's a group called True the Vote, which is national. I think they're based in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm not sure. As far as what's going on in California, this is a very tough subject because they have adopted a lot of changes, all of which have removed some form of security that was put in place to prevent something from happening. So, for instance, we now have ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is something that was a felony in many states. It was a crime here, and several governors vetoed, both parties, Schwarzenegger and Gray Davis, vetoed bills that would have legalized ballot harvesting, saying that it was just not secure enough to have anyone give their ballot to anyone and drag them over to the county offices. That wasn't secure enough. But Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill that legalized ballot harvesting. So that's one example. Another example is we now have automatic voter registration at the DMV, which is accidentally registering people who are not citizens. I'm not talking about illegal immigrants, but just people who are foreign born living here who are not citizens. They are being accidentally registered to vote. I don't know that they're voting. I hear from many people that, people call me and they say, I shouldn't have gotten a ballot. What do I do to get rid of it? Well, the Secretary of State's office under Alex Padilla made a bunch of changes that made it impossible to collect the data on how often that happens. So you can't go to them and say, look how many people you've registered inadvertently. We have to fix this. They stopped collecting the data on that. They literally changed the regulations so they didn't ask the question. That's one example. We have our vote centers, which are now 11 days in some places. Anywhere, 1,000 vote centers in Los Angeles County. You can vote from Agoura Hills to Pomona, from Lancaster to Long Beach. They don't know who you are. You can go in and say you're anybody and give their address, and they have to give you a ballot. Lots of people in politics have the voter list, and they know who votes frequently and who votes infrequently. But let me just tell you how insecure this is. I could walk into a vote center anywhere in Los Angeles County, and I could say, I'm Kim Kardashian, and this is my address in Hidden Hills. I'm here to vote. Now, they know I'm not Kim Kardashian, but they can't say that. If I give them the address and she hasn't voted yet, they're going to give me a ballot. And I can vote. It's going to go in the machine. I could turn around and say, haha, I fooled you, I'm not. That ballot doesn't come out of the box. That ballot is counted. That's how this works. So voter impersonation, I don't know how often it happens. They don't collect any data on it. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to reverse it. But when Kim Kardashian shows up to vote, they're going to tell her she already voted, and they're going to give her the pink provisional envelope. And then they're going to count that at the very end of the process. When they've counted all the absentee ballots, they're going to verify the provisional ballots. Here's how they verify this. And I talked to the county. I talked to the registrar's office. I have this in writing. This is how they do it. They check two things. Is the voter registered? And did the voter already vote? And they're going to say, I'm sorry, this voter already voted. And they're going to throw out Kim Kardashian's pink provisional ballot and count the fraudulent one. That's a vulnerability. If you have precinct voting, at least the neighbors have a shot at knowing that you are the person you say you are, because everybody lives 2-3 blocks away. But if I'm going to go vote in Agoura Hills or Long Beach or Lancaster, there's a lot, people can be fooled. And you have 11 days of this. You could take a cartload, it's illegal, of course, but you could take a cartload of volunteers and drive around with the voter file and fraudulently vote on the day that balloting opens. And then let's not even get into the things that could happen with mail ballots. We're mailing out 22 million ballots to all registered voters, which is not secure because many of those people don't live where they said they lived when they registered. They've moved out or they passed away. And ballots are flying around. And they're like money. Ballots are like money.
We hear people are doing exactly that. They're giving them $5 for the ones that are down on Skid Rows, whatever. Let me have your ballot's been unfilled out. They'll fill it out for them, and we'll put it back in. Tell them how you know about this stuff, Susan. From your past experience, I know that when you ran, you had to have some votes recounted.
I did. When I ran for the assembly in a special election, it was a very close election, and I asked for a recount. We did a one-day recount. You have to pay a lot of money for it, so I did a one-day recount. And we went in and we looked at the voter registers. It was before the electronic stuff. We looked at the punch cards. There were several trays of ballots from different precincts that were not available to us. We said, where are they? Well, we don't know. The ballots are moved around because they're verified in different places. We can't put our hands on it right now. Really? That was odd. It was instructive. There was very little security. The ballots were moved around on carts with no cameras and no security. And anybody could have put ballots in the trays or taken ballots out of the trays. So that's what I saw with my own eyes when we went and did that. And then it got less secure from there. Now they don't even use the punch cards. Now they're using the ballot marking devices. But there's many different ways that the software can be tampered with. And you don't have to take my word for it. In 2020, when the Secretary of State's office did the official certification of these new systems in Los Angeles County, there were several conditions that were put on it. And one of them was you must put tape over the USB ports in the administrative servers in the back office, because otherwise someone could come in with a USB device and load malicious code. So they certified the system for use if they put so-called security tape, tamper evidence security tape, over the USB ports.
And by the way, that
Feel
system
secure?
that system was put in by Padilla, who's now our state, our federal,
Our U.S. Senator.
U.S. Senator. And
Yeah.
he put in that particular system when he was up there at the behest of the party.
Yeah.
Question that they were going to change what they're going to use for the software up there. I think that Catherine, do we answer your question good enough for that?
Let me just
Oh, yeah,
touch
please.
on the Gascon recall. There's
Oh, yes, yes, yes,
litigation.
please.
There's a lawsuit over the Gascon recall, and that is going forward, and it could go to trial in March. I heard from the attorneys who were working on this. It could go to trial in March. The registrar's office tried to have various claims thrown out. The court refused to throw them out. So they are going forward. One of the claims they're going to look at is whether the voter roll in LA County is bloated with people who are not here, which affects how many signatures were required, because it's 10% of the registered voters that's required to authorize a recall, to qualify a recall. And if you don't have the right number of registered voters, then you have a false threshold, and they're asserting that, and they have lots of evidence for that. So that could go to trial in March. So there's going to be a primary March 5th. Voting starts probably February 5th. I always tell people that election day is really, now that we're voting by mail, a month earlier than you think it is. So if you're involved in politics, set your mental clock to February 5th election date, because that's when the people start voting. So Gascon could emerge from the primary. The general election will be in November. Voting starts in October, but he could actually potentially face a recall before the November election if that lawsuit is successful.
Susan, I just got a question that came in. It's actually from Don. He said he tried to access the repealthedeathtax.com. He was redirected to
Reinstate 58. Yeah, that's correct.
HJTA.org. Is that still correct?
That's correct. Yes,
Right, so-
reinstate. You know, Prop 58 was the parent-child transfer that passed in 1986.
Okay.
So we originally set up the website as reinstate 58 at hjta.org. That is correct. We just never were able to really change it.
Okay.
The
so
reason
that-
we call it repeal the death tax is because we don't want to talk about all these numbers, 19, 58, 13, people get confused.
in essence, an alias, if you will, for the
It's-
site what it goes to. So if
It's,
anybody
yes,
goes there and they see that they're being kicked over to another site, it's not somebody.
it's not fraud, it's the real
Okay,
thing.
not somebody coming there trying to create some problems. Hope that answers that for you, Don. Listen, Susan, we thank you more than you know for coming back out and talking about these things. If it wasn't for you again keeping your ear to the rail on the stuff that's going on, I don't think we would know half of it because we hear the others up there. And I'm amazed at the fact when I'm talking to even my grandkids who are older, they're not teenagers anymore. They don't read the newspapers. They're very smart. In fact, my grandson just got sworn in as an attorney. They don't read the newspapers. They don't listen to the news on television. They're getting their news information from TikTok,
Ah,
or Facebook. And I'm going,
that's not good.
you're killing me here. It's terrible. And this is tough stuff. And as a result, they just don't know these things are going on. They don't know the details there. People are glossing over because these details are going, I don't have time to get into this stuff. We have to be spoon-fed that going, listen, this is what they're doing. They're going to destroy single-family homes. They're going to tax you out of existence if you don't do something about it. If you read a ballot initiative and it doesn't make sense to you, hit the little no vote. No, not because it sounds good to you. If you read the text, you read the stuff there, if it doesn't make sense to you, somebody's trying to bamboozle you here. They're trying to say, listen, here's the headline to it. Vote the headline, not the substance, Vote the picture on the menu, not the soup you're actually being served. And so watch it. Watch what's coming up. This is our last chance, I think, on a lot of these things, especially with our single family homes and with our community being the way it is and to cut down on the density. Ms. Shelley, I want you to keep up the work that you're doing.
Happy to.
And I want to thank all of the people who stayed with us tonight on a very difficult, tedious subject. And I thank you for making it easier for us to understand. We wish all of you a blessed holiday. Enjoy the Christmas season. Be happy, be thankful, enjoy your family, stay healthy. And we will see all of you, I guess, next year, as they say, huh?